Thank you for joining us, all of you from the Cathedral community, but also all of you who are coming from other parts of our diocese other than that. So welcome to all of you. It is my privilege and special honor, and this is kind of phrase, isn't it? But in this case, it is quite important to welcome in our midst the very Reverend Canon Richard Sewell, Dean of St. George's College in Jerusalem. As you would know, over this previous many years, few years in the cathedral, 5-6 years, we have been praying and establishing links with St. George's College through our different Lenten actions, especially on Good Friday. And it is a great joy that I can welcome Richard here in our midst this evening. Richard is going to be with us tomorrow in the cathedral at Eucharist at 8 o'clock and at 10 o'clock, and he's going to preach. There is that old thing that you all know, that precentor doesn't preach on Trinity Sunday. He always finds someone else to spread the heresies. So that will be Richard tomorrow. But it is wonderful, Richard, to have you here. Richard he will tell us why is he here. He is visiting New Zealand for a few days before the meeting of the St. George's College in Jerusalem Regional Committee of Australia and New Zealand on Tuesday in Melbourne. You don't want to listen to me? Richard, thank you so much. Warm welcome to New Zealand, warm welcome to Auckland and our cathedral, and feel like at home here. It cannot be just the same like in Jerusalem, but we wish to offer you warmth of our hearts, which you would have in weather in Jerusalem at this stage. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me. Bit higher. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you, and thank you for the invitation. Ivica and I first met each other in 2019, where we shared on the Sharing Perspectives Interfaith course at St. George's, and we made a strong connection there, and we've kept it up through a variety of ways of making sure we stay in contact. And so I've heard about your cathedral and about this community in different ways, but great pleasure actually to be here in your midst for my first ever trip to your region, to your country, and I've been made to feel so welcome. And thank you, all of you, for coming out on a Saturday night. I know time is very precious, and it's a privilege and a pleasure to be able to share with you today. And you must already have some strong interest in this issue of Israel and Palestine and Christians in the Holy Land and pilgrimage in the Holy Land, because you don't just wander out because you've got nothing better to do on a Saturday night. You must feel some reason. And I'm going to share with you a whole range of things about the work that I do, the college, and the Christians in the land, and issues that we're facing today, of which there are so many. And I'll speak for probably half an hour, and then we'll have lots of time for questions, because I think it would be more interesting and valuable for us to be directed by the things you're interested in than me going on and on and on. So I first of all want to begin by just explaining a little bit about St. George's College. It sounds like we're an academic institution, and we were originally intended to be that, but actually we're a pilgrimage centre. We're the Anglican pilgrimage centre in Jerusalem, and we receive pilgrims from all over the world. And you can't do a degree or a master's or a PhD in Holy Land studies or pilgrimage. You just come on pilgrimage. And a number of you have, I know, been to St. George's, and those that haven't, I hope you may somehow find a way of doing that. It's all very well hearing me talk about it, it's all very well seeing photographs, but nothing beats having your feet on the ground. And it's the sights and smells, tastes, and the interactions with people in the land that really make it so special. So, of course, not everybody can, and so maybe a little vignette will be helpful to you, but those that think they might be able to come or return, it's a very warm welcome from me to come. And Everything that you need to know you can find on our website, which on the very last slide you'll see our website. Everything you need to know is there, and you can be in contact directly with me if you wish to. We call our pilgrimages courses or study pilgrimages, and I'll explain why we use that term. But the college was founded over 100 years ago to be the place that Palestinians would be trained to be priests. But in the event that never happened, because there were never enough at any one time to justify having all the necessary infrastructure to set up a theological college. So it took a little while, and actually only really in the early 1960s, that there was an actual building with rooms for people to stay and to study in, that the college was set up in that way. And since then, we've gradually become more and more sharply focused on pilgrimages. And they can be for 10 days, 12 days, or 14 days. People say, oh, we'll come to those because that's on one of the slides, how they are different. And maybe we'd have the first slide. So there we are. That's the main gate into the college. And the college building is the slightly less interesting one on the left, and the building beautifully caught in the morning sun is the tower of the cathedral. So the college is located in the cathedral close, and in the close, college, cathedral, the guest house where also pilgrims come to stay, but not part of the college, but we have all our meals in the guest house dining room or in the beautiful guest house garden. There's also St. George's School, which is a local school from kindergarten age right up to 18, and also the diocesan offices are there. So it's quite an extensive area, compact, very, very peaceful, and a beautiful place not far from the old city of Jerusalem. And this is what we say we're about. Pilgrimage, which is also about formation for faith, formation for clergy, formation for lay people. It's about the growth of faith. Pilgrimage is not just a sort of extended special type of holiday. It's something that really enlivens faith and deepens our faith and gives us motivation and inspiration. Sometimes you would hope for the rest of your lives. Certainly, those that come to us on our pilgrimages say to me, corresponding with me afterwards, this is something that remains with me as a strong experience that I continue to draw on. I remember so many things about it, and it is something I cherish. And one of the things is, of course, when you've been reading scripture in the place where that event occurred, every time through the Christian year, you hear that reading. The visitation of Mary to Elizabeth, the Annunciation, the calming of the storm on the Sea of Galilee, the miracle of the multiplication of the fish and the loaves, the Sermon on the Mount, the Ascension. All of these, you hear the reading and you think, I was there. I heard that reading when I was there. And it immediately takes you back to that strong experience, and it enlivens the reading and gives you a much deeper sense of being present in that place. So it's formation. It's education, because the amount that you learn is extraordinary. The layers of history are quite incredible. We're talking often about 3,000 years of history. When we visit a site, we'll talk about the Old Testament narrative that might be located in that place. Certainly, Jesus' life and the early church, so going back 2,000 years. And then on top of that, you're maybe looking at a Byzantine church from the 4th century, either demolished or knocked down by an earthquake or a fire, then rebuilt again later and in the Crusader period, and then again in a later period, perhaps in the 19th or 20th century, and then we're looking at the present. So layers and layers of history like that, right where you stand, and you can see evidence of all of those things in front of you. So we're talking about the history, both theological and historical. And it's about encounter. It's not just about the stones, it's about the people. We say not just the ancient stones, but the living stones, the Christians of today who live in the land. Because this is not just about going to an open-air museum, it's about encountering the reality today. People live in the Holy Land. They have complicated, often too complicated lives, and we want to meet them and hear from them, hear what their lived experience is. The Christians, yes, of course, but also the Muslims and the Jews, so that we have an understanding of this conflict that we hear about, but we hear it for ourselves. We hear people talk about the impact and what it means. So it's about the personal encounters as well. It's a rich and deep experience in so many ways. Next slide, please. So if you can just about see from where you're sitting, on the right-hand side is the college. You saw the building from another angle. This picture is taken from the top of the cathedral tower. All those steps winding, winding, winding up to the top, and you get a panoramic view of our beautiful rooftop, where we can sit and relax and enjoy the beautiful views from up there. But all our accommodation is there, our lecture hall, our little chapel, our library, and our lecture room and other study rooms. And you get a sense of the space. It's a very green space. The climate in Jerusalem is of long, hot, dry summers and wet and cold winters. But it creates a beautiful climate for trees, shrubs, plants to grow. Beautiful colours, this time of year especially, absolutely beautiful. And you see a little bit of that from the path, but anybody who's been to St. George's will be very familiar with this path, which takes us from the college round to the cathedral and to the guest house. And everybody who walks in says what a beautiful atmosphere there is. It's a place of calm and peace. Whatever is going on outside the gates, outside the close, people come back and have this sense of peace and calm in the cathedral close. And we can accommodate up to 40 people. We normally say 36, but strictly speaking 40. And we're just 10 minutes away from the old city of Jerusalem. Inside the old city is where the vast majority of the holy historical sites are. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Al-Aqsa Mosque, Temple Mount, and the Western Wall. So many other churches and places that you will be familiar with. Just 10 minutes walk into the city. And the old city itself is very small. It's just a square kilometre, surrounded by a wall with 7 gates that you can go in and out of. The rest of the city is huge, and there's lots of it, but many, many pilgrims don't really encounter much of the rest of modern West Jerusalem, because our keen interest is what happened and what is still happening in the old city. And that's what you have chance to do. Walk out of the college into the city, and then we wander around discovering the places of significance, spending time in them so they become familiar. And it's a rich, powerful experience to rub shoulders with the residents of the city who are going about their business busily, rushing to prayers, either Christians, Muslims or Jews, people going about their shopping and ordinary life. And pilgrims are in amongst the ordinary life of the city. Next slide, please. And this is one group of pilgrims, actually a group of ordinands, trainee clergy from England, from different parts of England, and we're standing there on the top of the Mount of Olives, the view that Jesus had himself when he walked into the city, stopped, and halfway down cried over the pain of Jerusalem. He had this similar, extraordinary view, but instead of the golden dome of the Rock, there would have been the temple, rebuilt by Herod the Great, even bigger and more magnificent than the Dome of the Rock, dominating the view of Jerusalem. And there we will take a group up early on the top of the Mount of Olives, looking out over the city to give an orientation, because there you can see almost a bird's eye view of the city and the main topographical features, important buildings, beginning to get the idea of how this city sits in its own situation. And initially it can be very overwhelming, all these beautiful places that you don't really know their significance, all the history that comes at you from so many sides. But with expert teaching from our course director, gradually, slowly, the pieces of the jigsaw begin to fit into place. And whatever doesn't make immediate sense, there's always time to ask questions, and over meals you can explore further. What did that mean? Or let's hear it again, what that was about. Help me to understand. And gradually in time, things begin to make sense. Let's have the next slide. So we talk about our courses at St. George's. A course is a pilgrimage, but because we think of our pilgrims as students, well, a disciple is a student, because a disciple is a learner, and a student is a learner. So in a way, one and the same thing. And I talked about 10, 12, and 14 days. So typically that we call the 10-day one the Introduction to Bible Lands, the 12-day one the Footsteps of Jesus, and the 14-day one is the Palestine of Jesus. Sometimes people say to me, what's the difference between the three? I say one's 10 days, one's 12 days, and one's 14 days. It's very complicated, isn't it? And the longer we have, the more we can see. But on the 14-day one, you will see probably everything that you see on the other two, plus what the extra days enable us to do. Some feel they can only afford 10, so they come do the 10 days. It's 1 day staying up in Galilee instead of 2 days on the other two courses, so you get a little bit more time up in Galilee. And time in Galilee is really important, because a Holy Land pilgrimage is not just about Jerusalem. In fact, we probably only spend, 20-25% of all our time in Jerusalem. And those 2 days on 2 of the courses up in Galilee, for many people they would say, that was a most special time for me. It's slightly slower pace. Jerusalem is a hustle and a bustle, and it can be a little bit more tense and just busy. Go up to Galilee, it's like getting out of the city and into the countryside. The Sea of Galilee is the most extraordinarily beautiful place, just in its own right, even if you'd heard nothing about it from reading the Gospels. But because we know the Gospels, and because we know what happened around the Sea of Galilee, for many people, it's sort of like a spiritual homecoming too. And that's really, really important part of what we do. But in addition to those basic courses, which we run throughout the year, we have other special courses, talk about ministry formation, particular courses which focus on ministry formation, like that group of Church of England ordinands, where we're looking at how their preaching might be impacted by the places, how they're going to use the material in sermons and other talks that they do, how it's going to affect how they teach about Old Testament, New Testament, and all those things. But also the Sharing Perspectives course that Ivica came on. Once a year we do the Interfaith course, and Christians, Muslims, Jews from different parts of the world come together to visit each other's holy places together. Talk about what does it mean for a Muslim to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque? What does it mean for a Jewish person to go to the Western Wall? And look at our scriptures together, so that we understand how we read them in similar ways and in different ways. And that's a different type of encounter, and very powerful in itself. And then various other ones like the Holy Land and the Arts, which particularly focuses on the arts in the land. We may spend a bit longer in some museums. We may go specially, for instance, to Hadassah Hospital to see wonderful stained glass windows that are there, or in the National Library. All sorts of different things that we, on that course, will have a special focus on. And at the moment, just tomorrow night, I think, back in Jerusalem, we've got the Women in the Bible course starting, and a guest speaker coming from England to talk about that. So same places, many of the same stories, but a special prism through which to look and see things, so that appeals to some people in a different way. Next slide, please. So we talk about visiting the holy places. So a pilgrimage, that's what we would most expect to be going to. The holy places, especially of our Christian tradition. Here is a picture of the Holy Sepulchre with this huge dome over the top of it, with natural light that comes in through the hole in the roof. It's not open to the air, it's glass, but the sun shafts down through, casts upon this building right in the middle. The building is it's called an edicule in Latin, means little house. The little house, well, it's higher than this ceiling, but it encompasses the cave in which Jesus was buried. And the extraordinary thing is, the most important thing about that holy site is that there's nothing there. It's empty because it's the resurrection. It's an empty cave where Jesus was buried. And we don't know 100% certain that it was, but the way that we teach it, the way that you would hear it, you would hear the archaeological and historical evidence for why it's broadly considered to be the place. Certainly where Jesus was buried. Whether he was resurrected, that's a matter of faith. That can't be proved, but we believe it. It's the foundation of our faith. And what we will do when we go to the holy places is we give the archaeology, we give the history, we give the biblical background to it, so that those layers begin to make sense. Sometimes, like when we go to visit the Holy Sepulchre, we'll have a lecture before we go in the lecture room with slides and all sorts of background information. So when you get there, you already have a sense of what this place is about, because it's so complex, it's so overwhelming, that having a bit of background before you get there can be really helpful. And that's what we take seriously. Next site, next one. But as well as the holy places, it's the historical sites. Not all of them have the same spiritual significance as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but we want to understand the historical context within which the biblical stories took place. So, for instance, on the left, there is the huge Roman city of Bet-Shan, up in the northern area of the land, just south of the Sea of Galilee. And it was destroyed by an earthquake in the 3rd century, completely destroyed. Gradually, layer and layer of mud and earth and everything else covered it, and it was lost in antiquity. And only really in the last 50, 60 years has it been uncovered. And now you can go and visit a site like that and explore its incredible riches, all sorts of fascinating things. And then on the right-hand side is the top of Masada, famous site in Jewish folklore and history. It's the place where the historian Josephus recounts how the Jewish rebels in 70 AD fled from the Roman forces and ended up there in the fortress which King Herod the Great had made, and they were besieged by the Romans. The 10th Legion of the Roman army besieged it there. You can see the best evidence of Roman siege tactics here at Masada, because the remains of their camps are around the base of Masada. And then a powerful narrative of the Jews who finally, when the Romans breached the walls, breached the fortress, they all took their own lives, and the Romans came in only to find, I think, a couple of women and a couple of children left who had hidden and not been killed. The rest took their own lives rather than being captured and made slaves of the Romans. So we look at those sort of historical places as well. Next slide. We also go to the places that help to fill out the picture of what the Holy Land is all about. And the desert is something very important to its features in Scripture strongly, especially for us thinking about Jesus after his baptism, driven by the Holy Spirit into the desert for 40 days of temptation. And for us to be able to spend a bit of time in the desert, praying or contemplating, takes us into that experience of Jesus, gives us a much stronger sense of what it must have been like for Jesus. And we learn about the desert. If you've never spent any time in the desert, it's hard to really comprehend it. When you're there and we look at how the desert is understood in Christian tradition, the history of Christian monasticism, the desert fathers and mothers who went off to the desert for long periods of time. Why? What's it about? And we explore that and give you time to be there. Next slide, please. And then water features large as well. Here's the Sea of Galilee, and we'll give people chance just to sit beside it, hear the sound of the water lapping, maybe take your shoes and socks off, put your feet in the water. There's a peace and there's a calm, and it enables prayerful contemplation. It's, for many people, a really special moment. And we try not to do that thing of just rushing. On the bus, get to a place, off the bus, quickly see it, back on the bus. We like to help people to engage with places, stop and experience it. Next slide. So we talk about study pilgrimages. They're courses, yes, because they are about engaging deeply, and the study element is really important. So I talked about having a lecture beforehand. This is our lecture room, and through lectures, explaining background, but also talking together so that we hear each other's perspectives. That's important. Sharing, comparing experiences and seeing what we can learn from each other. And I've talked about how we'll, on arrival at a site, we'll maybe have also an on-site mini lecture. I mean, it's a talk helping us to understand the history and the archaeology and the biblical background. So it takes us deep. There are many different ways of going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. I obviously think we do it best. But what we are different to others is that going a bit deeper, not just a sort of a guided tour of, but a deep engagement with. Next slide. But it's a pilgrimage as well because it is a profoundly spiritual experience. It's wrapped and enfolded in prayer. We might start the beginning of the day in the cathedral with the Eucharist, part of the pattern of cathedral life. And then when we arrive in a place, in addition to hearing the scripture, we will also pray and think deeply about the place that we're in. So we're encountering the scripture in its original context, in its geographical context. And of course, for Christian pilgrims, what they most of all want to do is to feel the proximity to where Jesus was. And when we feel that, I hear over and over again, in that place I felt my feet were where Jesus' feet may have been. And for Christians, more than for Jewish and Muslim pilgrims, that sense of proximity to the life of the center of faith is what's important. It really is a spiritual experience for us. And so we try to help people. You can't make that happen. And different places resonate with different people. No expectations, no obligations. But at some point during the pilgrimage, there'll be a place or two or three where you think, yes, that for me was a really special moment. Next slide, please. Yes, the historical places, the holy places, but also the people of the land. And the people of the land, first and foremost for us as Christians, is the Christians in the land. If you don't go to the Holy Land and meet Christians who live locally, then you've missed something absolutely vital. It is about engaging with the people and the Christians who worship there. And there has been an unbroken presence of Christians in the land since the time of Jesus. We think about the periods of missionary activity, but there were Christians there way, way, way before any of that in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. And so throughout all that time, they've been protecting the holy sites, keeping the life of faith alive, but to be honest, with increasing difficulties and challenges. So the fact that Christian pilgrims go and want to meet with the Christians locally is a cause of huge encouragement to the people, that they feel not forgotten. They feel that people know. So many people misunderstand and say, imagine that Palestinians are all Muslims, and forget that Palestinians are Christians and they're worshipping like us. And there are Anglican Palestinian Christians. My church, the Anglican Church in the Holy Land, is a 98% Palestinian church. The first language of our church is Arabic. It's not Hebrew, it's not English, it's Arabic, because the people are Palestinian. That's their culture, that's their language. And so here, 2 pictures from our cathedral, St. George's. On a typical Sunday, we'll have the local Palestinian people, we'll have expatriates who work in Jerusalem, and then anything up to 200, 250 pilgrims who are with us on the day. And we don't know from one week to the next how many people will be coming. That's part of the beautiful mix of how we do things at St. George's. And it's a crossroads of the world. So Jerusalem, the Holy Land, is a magnet for Christians from everywhere. When you walk around the city, when you come to church, you'll find Christians from any part of the globe, from every continent and potentially any country. And that's another one of the exciting things. And actually on St. George's pilgrimages, we're usually a mix of people from different parts of the world. So as well as encountering the land and all of that, you're encountering the Anglican Communion, sometimes even Roman Catholics, sometimes Methodists, Baptists even. My goodness, we've even had Salvation Army people. All are welcome. And, you know, that's a deeply enriching thing, to be able to share in this experience with people of different traditions, from different parts of the world, and that helps to fill out our own experience of what it means to be a Christian in the world today. Next slide, please. But other people of the land are Jewish, of course. People expect to meet Jewish people in the land, and we make sure that our pilgrims do. And see how Jews go about their worshipping. Most obviously, we can observe that at the Western Wall. And this is on the right-hand side is groups of men praying together at the Western Wall. The wall would be here on this side, and they're looking that way. There's a division at the Western Wall because it's according to Orthodox Judaism, men and women are separated. You can just see the women on this side, a little row of them, taking photographs. It's probably a bar mitzvah, and the women aren't allowed to be around the men. That's how it is. But they're allowed to look over the fence, take their photographs, clap at the appropriate times. Actually, they throw sweets at the boy when he reads his Torah scripture to put him off. That's one of the traditions that they have. And then on the left-hand side, this is actually from when Ivica was with us, and we were visiting a kibbutz in the West Bank, hearing about their experience of what it means to be Jews in the land today, and their history and their struggles. And that's really important, that we hear the different perspectives, the different narratives, which are often in conflict. And we don't try and, there's no solution, there's no solving of it, but we want to hear the narratives so that we understand a little bit better how people describe it for themselves. And then the next slide, please. And then the other main group of people in the land are the Muslims. So we want you to have the chance to meet Muslims. Actually, this is a British imam, and it was on the Sharing Perspectives course, and he was taking us and explaining the significance of the Muslim sites. Sheikh Ibrahim knows the land well, so he's a great guide to help us to understand the land. And this is what's important, so that people speak for themselves. We don't presume to be experts in faiths which are not our own, but we give people the chance to speak for themselves, and then people can make their own judgments, make their own reflections about what people say about their own faith. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to be a pilgrim? Well, we all think we know. It sort of seems to make perfect sense, even on a superficial level, but there are so many more layers to it than often we acknowledge. And as a pilgrim, perhaps, we see as the first pilgrim Abraham, and we can learn from Abraham about what it means to be a pilgrim. He was sent from his home, all that was familiar, sent by God to go on a long journey. He did not know exactly where, just with a promise that when he went, he would know the reason. And so with faith, with trust, with probably a little bit of fear, he set out on his journey. And in the end, he found himself in the land which had been promised to him. And for a pilgrim, it's not just the destination that's important, it's the getting there, it's the traveling. That's important as well. We talk about a sacred journey with a sacred purpose. So, it's about learning how to journey together. Journeying with others. It's not a solo journey, usually as a pilgrim. It's something shared. It's the relationships that we establish with others who are pilgrims with us, and it's the relationships of those we meet along the way that are important. It's about encounter. It's about coming with an open heart in our meetings with people. Not quite knowing what it is that's going to happen, but open to the possibilities. And it's an encounter with the other, with God himself, that as we meet with people in places of great significance, we can find that God speaks to us in ways that perhaps we had. They'll never read the Bible quite in the same way again when they've read it in the land. And it's there to re-energize our faith. And I hope that it is for all those who come. But if you're not able to go on pilgrimage to the Holy Land, maybe there are other ways that you can go on pilgrimage closer to home, because it's such a blessing to us all wherever we are able to do that. And you may find, maybe there are already well-known places of pilgrimage here in your own country, places of important historical and spiritual significance. And I commend that to you, however it is you can do your pilgrimage. So then we can go to the last slide, but I think it's just the final page with the website and the other ways in which you can stay in touch with the college. But just to say one or two other things about the land and the context that we live in. First of all, St. George's is an institution of the Diocese of Jerusalem. The Diocese of Jerusalem is a huge geographical area. It covers the countries of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. So it's a very significant area geographically, also politically. So many troubles and challenges exist within that area. And so our bishop, who is an archbishop, Hossam, has got a huge responsibility for trying to support the Anglican Christians in those troubled parts of the world. So we appreciate your prayers. We have, in that huge area, we've got a small number of people, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 Anglicans in total. So we're very small. And in the Holy Land, Christians only account for less than 2% of the whole population. So we're numerically insignificant. But I like to think we make an impact way beyond what our numbers would suggest because of the way in which we engage with our communities. Because although we only have 31 churches, we have 33 institutions which are part of our diocese. And that's hospitals and schools, vocational training centres and rehabilitation centres, homes for elders, and various other institutions as well. And that means that our ministry touches many, many thousands of other lives beyond the few thousand Anglicans that worship in our churches. And so, for instance, we have a hospital in the Gaza Strip, the Al-Ali Hospital, which is supported by the Anglican Missions Board here in New Zealand. And that's a vital part of the support for one of the most vulnerable parts of the world. The Palestinians in the Gaza Strip experienced tremendous deprivation and challenges because of the particularities of their life, enclosed with a wall that the Israelis will only let a few people out with permission. So our support there is really vital. But many other ways in which we're able to support the wider life of the community through our institutions. And St. George's College sits alongside all those other ones. And in the Holy Land, I mean, you will have read, I'm sure, the politics of the land at the moment. We've had 5 elections in 4 years. There are always coalition governments. They're unstable because the coalition is of so many little parties, and it only needs one of those special interest parties to feel put out, and they'll not vote for the government, and suddenly the government falls. And the present government, headed again by Benjamin Netanyahu, is the most extreme, the most right-wing and racist government that Israel has ever had. And it's a profoundly worrying time and has caused deep upset in the Jewish community, apart from anybody else. And you will have seen huge demonstrations taking place in Israel, in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, up to 500,000 people on the streets protesting against what the current government is trying to do in a judicial review. So it's caused immense social unrest and great division amongst the people. And that's to say nothing of, in a sense, the even deeper problem, which is the occupation, the way in which Palestinians are not free to move and to have their own aspirations, to have their own nation established. That's been a long promise that has never been realized. And 2 million Palestinians live in the West Bank without complete freedom of movement, with their lives controlled by Israeli security forces in many, many ways, and another 2 million living in the Gaza Strip without those rights that we would take for granted. And that's an ongoing reality, a cause of deep pain for people in the land. And your prayers and your support for them in whatever ways you can is really, really important. And I think that's probably sufficient. I've gone over a little bit. But lots of time for us to pick up on any of those sorts of things that you'd like to ask about, either in terms of pilgrimage, or the politics, or the experience of Christians in the land, anything at all that you'd like to ask. Ivica, do you want to coordinate the asking of questions?
Gladly. So can you give one big applause? Thank you very much, Richard, for your words. Look, I'm here just to be of help, so which means we have really good period of time to ask some questions, which is really good, because as Richard said, the worst for speaker is to go to one direction and you might be interested to go somewhere else. So I'm not intending to direct the conversation in any particular direction apart from the polite one and nice one. And maybe just to start, one question, and then I would like to see the hands, please, so I can put you in order, in line. I am a Palestinian living in Hebron. I would like to go on Friday prayer to Al-Aqsa Mosque or to visit my relatives in Jaffa. How can I do that?
You can't. On the whole, almost impossible for you to do that. Hebron is in the West Bank, and the vast majority of Muslims are not given a permission to go through the dividing wall. So the entire West Bank is surrounded either by 30-foot high concrete wall, so the height of this chapel, with security towers spread at regular distances along, and only particular places where you can go through. And in order for you living in Hebron, city in the south of the West Bank, for you to go to Jaffa, into Israel, would require you writing permission, asking permission. And mostly if you are under 55 years of age, male under 55 years, you will not be given permission. There are exceptions, there are cases, there are ways of requesting, but it's completely in the gift of the Israeli government, and if they say no, you have absolutely no rights to appeal that decision. You simply have to accept it. And most Palestinians that I meet have never been to Jerusalem. That I meet in the West Bank have never been to Jerusalem. So for a Christian who prior to the building of the wall of separation could freely move from where they live, whether it's Bethlehem or Hebron or Jenin, would have been able to go to the Holy Sepulchre for Easter or go, now cannot do that. So their lives are severely restricted. And that's, Israel say the reason is because it's all about the security of Israelis. They have experienced too many bombings in Israel, and so they found it more acceptable to cut everybody off from coming into Israel and just decide who will come in and when. But that means that the vast majority of people cannot move in and out of the wall.
Thomas, if I may come completely from left field and ask a personal question.
Sure.
I have a sense that you're the right man for the job, and that's not meant to be condescending. What was your background? What led you to seek or to accept the position you now hold?
Well, thank you for the question. I hope I am the right person for the job. I feel that the job came looking for me, or at least it was a vocational experience for me, because I had no intention to go. I had no idea about the opportunity to go to Jerusalem to serve. But to my surprise, when I was taking my own church from London on pilgrimage and went to St. George's Cathedral on Sunday morning, it so happened that I knew the Archbishop's chaplain. He was from London, from my diocese, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Richard, you ought to know that there's a vacancy for the post of dean at the college." And I said, "David, I'll pray for you. It's an important appointment. I hope you find the right person." He said, "No, I mean you should apply for the job." Well, I was a bit slow on the uptake, but I just laughed at him and said, "David, that's not going to happen. That's not part of our plan or expectation at all." So I got back home to London. My wife had not come on the pilgrimage. I spoke to Julianne and I said, "You'll never believe what David said." He said, "I should apply for the job of dean. How crazy is that?" And she, being more perceptive and intuitive than me, said, "Well, maybe we should look at it. Maybe it's not so impossible." And we did. We looked at the job description, and to my amazement, I thought, well, that could be me. And more out of a sense of duty and obligation than out of, at that point, a real sense of vocation, I applied for the job, and I kept thinking that doors would shut and that would be it. Clearly not meant to be. But every time I came to the door sort of fell out open in front of me, and I walked through to the next stage and the next stage, till finally I sat in the room, having been interviewed by a wide international panel of people, and rather than saying, "Thank you for your time, but on this occasion you've been unsuccessful," the Archbishop said, "Thank you for your time, we'd like to offer you the job." And you could have knocked me down with a feather. I was truly amazed. But I did feel called. It's just that I had not really anticipated. And 3 months later, I found myself there. And it has proved to be very much the thing that I feel God called me to do. So it's been a remarkable journey, but one in which I feel a huge sense of fulfillment. And even though 2 years of COVID knocked everything off course and for 2 years, we had not one single pilgrim, and financially it was potentially disastrous, but by the grace of God, we came through, to my amazement, and we're now building from strength to strength, getting back to stronger place where we were before 2020. Thank you.
Margaret?
When you were in England, before you went there
Yes.
to St. George's, what position did you have in the church in England?
Well, nothing like the Dean of St. George's College. I was a parish vicar for 18 years in 3 different parishes in southwest London. But the last one was quite a large parish with 3 churches and 3 clergy, myself and 2 others. So I had to oversee and manage that, and looking after a fairly large, complex arrangement. So coming into a college with the staff that I have to look after there, which is not a big operation, but it's quite complicated for lots of reasons. I think I did have a good background. And also I'd worked internationally quite a lot. I'd worked for an Anglican missionary society for 8 years before I was ordained, so I knew about the worldwide church. And in my role as vicar for 18 years in my diocese, I'd also had a lot to do with our diocesan link with Zimbabwe and travelled in Zimbabwe. So I was used to knowing the church in other parts of the world. I wasn't just limited to my experience of the Church of England, and I think that's been really important.
Richard, we really like you, but I can promise you I didn't arrange Margaret and Thomas to be an interview panel for Joe here.
I'm not looking for a job.
Please feel free to ask questions, don't be shy.
Yes.
Gardini.
Richard, have you ever felt unsafe? And if so, how did you approach?
You'd think from hearing the news that I would be unsafe, wouldn't you? But I have to say, in all honesty, I have never felt afraid for my own security. In fact, the one time that I'm to be honest, I mean, this is not about stupid bravery, but perhaps I don't have much imagination, but I don't easily feel frightened about things that happen around. But the one time I do actually remember feeling a sort of a fear coming from within. Julianne and I were sitting in the back of our apartment having a quiet and lovely breakfast on a Saturday morning, and suddenly there was the most extraordinary explosion nearby. We get fireworks quite a lot, so you don't worry too much about it. But this was a huge bang, and then another, and then another, and another. You know, out of absolutely nowhere, 8 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, oh my goodness, the revolution has begun. And I ran to the top of the college, up to the top floor, to think, where are the tanks coming from? The combined Arab forces have arrived in Jerusalem finally to see off the crazy Israelis. And it was fireworks, but really so many of them. And it was on the day that the Palestinian exam results came out. And they were celebrating with, because they get released on the internet, like probably happens here. And you know, as soon as 8 o'clock in the morning, everybody sees them simultaneously, shot off these incredible fireworks and a few guns, because people have guns at home, and stupidly firing the gun in the air. So in the midst of the fireworks, there were some gunshots. But and then I had a good laugh thinking, there was me. Actually a little bit frightened, thinking, oh my goodness, this is outside our gate. But there have been times in 2021 when there were riots in the streets outside the college. And that was deeply distressing because of the violence that was taking place, the Palestinians who were protesting and being brutalized by the Israeli security forces. But we were not a target. They were not interested in us. So I did not feel that anyone was going to scale our walls and come attacking us. And that's the beauty of the college, that it is an enclave of calm and peace. And, you know, we know bad things do happen in Israel and Palestine, but because we've got our ear to the ground and we have local staff and we're very experienced in running courses, when anything is going on, we're alert to it. And I can call somebody, you know, if we're going to Nablus in the West Bank, I can call our priest in Nablus and say, "Good morning, Father Jamil, how are things in the city today? Is it wise for us to come and visit?" And sometimes he'll go, "Oh, there's no trouble. You know, it blew up yesterday, it's all gone now." Or he might say, "Probably best not to come today. Let's see how it is next week, and we'll just change our arrangements and go somewhere else." So we know how to avoid trouble. And I think that's the most important thing. It's not to give you an idea that there is no trouble, because that's palpably not true. But living there feels much less dangerous than you reading about it from over here. Because these are sort of, even when it's bad, it's still sort of isolated incidents. So, and my wife Julianne, who is a bit more prone to feeling afraid than me, if she was here, and I wish she was here for you to hear her account of it, she would say that the most afraid she gets is driving from the college to work, and the crazy drivers who do crazy things. And that's the only real fear, and even that she's getting used to. So no, we love living in Jerusalem. Our children, aged 23 and 25, come and visit us regularly. And we wouldn't let that happen if we felt it was in any way a dangerous place. We love living there. Oh, and I think there was a question here. Same question. Have I been afraid? I won't repeat the answer.
Yeah, you mentioned interaction with the Jewish and the Muslim communities. To what extent is there interaction, A, within the courses you run, B, separately from those courses, with the other Christian churches?
On the courses that we run?
A, on the courses, and B,
in general,
irrespective of that.
Okay, so we have some limited interactions with Jews and Muslims on our general courses, because primarily they are about pilgrimage and mixing with the Christians, but not, I mean, we certainly would not want to leave that side out. But in all honesty, it's marginal rather than centrally important. But those few encounters, I think, are very significant. But with Christians, then more widely, because you're going into Greek Orthodox churches, you're going into an Armenian church, and if a priest is there, I'll often ask them to come and speak to us, and they're always very happy to do that. So we want people to have a wide sense of the Christian community, which is very diverse, of denominations that often perhaps you won't encounter so much. You probably don't meet very many Coptic Christians here. There might be a church. There is a parish. But that's very much part of our day-to-day life when we're in and around, walking around the city or in other parts of the world. And Anglicans all the time are doing joint events with the Roman Catholics, with Greek Orthodox and the other smaller denominations. And the heads of churches now, in the last 15 years, heads of churches in Jerusalem have had regular meetings and discussed issues and problems and make regular joint statements, which I think in a city where Christian unity historically has not been easy to achieve for long, complex reasons, the fact that they are able to meet and talk and listen to each other is really important. And it shows something of a united front when we are on the receiving end of persecution of some sort or abuse of other sorts. When we can make a joint statement together, I think that is far more powerful. And sometimes we get heard and sometimes we do not get heard. But when Christians are so few, if we cannot be together, then we are really in a far weaker position. So we all know it's important, but actually having effective unity, we know is very difficult. I'm sure even here in Auckland, Christian unity is not always quite as great as you would want it to be.
To what degree do you find obstruction and restrictions from the Israeli government or the great authorities who are currently so very conservative right there?
Do we find obstructions? I mean, on the whole, they ignore us. We're so marginal to the national life that we don't really feature in their thinking. They've got much more concerns with monitoring the movements of Palestinian Muslims, say, and the large numbers that are moving about and trying to go to the mosques and having access to the mosques. But Christian and Muslim Palestinians do have common cause and do support one another. And people feel that shared identity as really important. And they would say, you know, we have several identities and all of them are important. And supporting one another as Muslims and Christians because of their Palestinian hopes and frustrations is important. One of the things that I think the church has found increasingly difficult is the restrictions on movement to go to the Holy Sepulchre at Greek Orthodox Easter, which is the largest number of Christians that want to go, and that the Israelis have been restricting the number of people that can go into the Holy Sepulchre and closing off the old city, and that feels like it's getting worse year by year. And fewer people are given permission. You know, each year a few will be given permission to come from Gaza and a few will be given permission to come from the West Bank. But it feels like those numbers are getting fewer each year. So the frustrations are getting greater. But, you know, we do petition the government and some of the government offices are committed to trying to hear our voice and to represent it to the higher levels. But even they, I think, sometimes feel they're up against some very resistant forces within a current government setup that is more sectional in its favour.
A bit further on that, the sort of archaeological remains of Christian interests. I've been reading that there are sort of problems of rewriting history and tending to ignore or overwhelm some of the more Christian archaeological remains. Do people get involved in all that, or is that something completely separate?
It's not something that directly affects us, but we see what's going on. There are some cases of that where Christian sites have not been properly preserved. But on the whole, the state of Israel wants to preserve Christian sites because it brings in a lot of foreign pilgrims. And they're pretty well disposed towards foreigners because of foreign currency and tourism. If you take pilgrimage as tourism, then it accounts for a huge amount of money coming in. And the state of Israel is certainly positive about that. So if there is a Christian site, there is an incentive for them to preserve it. And the Israeli National Parks, which looks after many of the sites, including Christian sites, I feel on the whole do a pretty good job in telling the story of Christian sites and ensuring that they are given proper protection. both from the environment, from the weather features, but also from people interfering with them. But there are some cases where maybe there are competing historical interests, and sometimes it feels like the Jewish interests take precedence over others. And there have been a few recent cases which have been pretty scandalous about that. And sometimes that's not the government directly, but settler movements who are looking for Jewish sites. All archaeology is political, because if you find certain things, it tells a story that can bolster your narrative. And so there's more archaeology done in the Holy Land probably than in any other country of the world, because the Israelis are still looking for evidence to show their history in the land and the truth of their narrative. So they throw a huge amount of money. And Christians from around the world put a lot of money into excavation of archaeological sites, because of course we want to uncover bits of our heritage too. On the whole, Muslims are less committed to the archaeological endeavour, but the preservation of the sites that they have today is really important. So like what we call Al-Aqsa, which is actually the whole area that Jews would call Temple Mount. It's a vast area in the old city. And there are groups of Jews who are striving and working to take back bits of Al-Aqsa. There are some groups that are committed to building a new temple, which would involve demolishing the Dome of the Rock and probably demolishing Al-Aqsa Mosque as well and building a third temple. And so the Muslims are really, really focused on ensuring that they protect the space that they call Al-Aqsa from these groups that are continually trying to take a bit here and a bit here and a bit here. And that's perhaps the greatest flashpoint of all. That's the cause. When you see things blowing up in the news, it normally or quite often has a lot to do with that.
Thank you for your talk this evening. In terms of being pilgrim or being the traveller and moving, as it were, quite freely within the community, let's say outside of the college, like Al-Aqsa, up in the north, up around the big wall. What might be some of the precautionary advice? What is the precautionary advice that you might offer pilgrims that haven't been to the Holy Land?
Always do as we tell you. Always obey the leader on the bus, because our advice is there for good reason. And I think in the vast majority of cases, our pilgrims trust the leadership of the college and the leader on the bus. And so when, at the moment our course director is Rodney, when Rodney says, please everybody don't do that, they know he really means it. And so there are things about safety, precaution, making sure you've got your passport with you at all times, because you have to be, and if you go into the West Bank and then want to come back out of the West Bank and you don't have your passport with you, there will be no end of trouble. And not taking photographs of soldiers, especially not taking photographs of soldiers at checkpoints, not making jokes in front of soldiers. They generally don't have a sense of humour. Understanding that you are in a highly pressured situation where the soldiers are themselves nervous, and so they're a little bit trigger happy. They would say they've got reason to be, because there are numerous incidents of soldiers being attacked, and there are reasons for that, but you're in a situation where the soldiers don't hold guns for decorative purposes. They are on high alert, and you see soldiers, they are holding their gun either like that or like that, and the finger is quite near the trigger, because they know that things can explode very quickly and unpredictably. So people coming in from outside, not used to that level of intensity, sometimes can misread a situation. But we're there to make sure people don't misread it, and that we advise and protect. And most people, well, we get a lot of Americans coming to the college, and they feel nervous when they arrive. And by the end, they'll say, well, I felt a lot safer here than I would have done walking downtown in my city. Where, frankly, the crime statistics are far, far higher than what you would find in Jerusalem, especially for visitors, because the conflict that we experience is really not targeted at visitors at all. You'd have to be pretty unlucky to get caught up in anything, because it's intercommunal.
Yeah. You've mentioned the short courses. What do you do if you want to take a long course?
We don't do any.
Oh, you don't?
We don't. We used to do 3-month courses, and people would come and spend a long time and use our library facilities and go off and do all sorts of things. But we have found that A, the demand is not quite there for that, or the cost is prohibitive. So unfortunately we don't offer that.
So it's something you want to do if you want to sort of build your own Christianity. You take a short course.
Yes.
And that helps you personally.
Yes, it does. And if you want to come and study for longer, you'd have to find out a way to do a course at the Hebrew University or something like that. But that's not all that easy to do.
How many languages do you offer these courses in?
We don't teach language. We just run pilgrimages. If you want to learn Arabic, you're going to have to come for 3 years. Yeah.
Say somewhere else.
You mentioned within the current administration of government is quite racist.
Yeah.
So what similarities or differences do the Palestinians and the Israelis have to create that?
Well, it's that you're talking about two distinct racial groups, religious groups, ethnic groups. So you're talking about Jewish Israelis and then Palestinians, who are a diverse group of, Christians and Muslims. Jews also are diverse in nationality. They may have come from almost any country of the world to live in the Jewish homeland. Israel set up as the Jewish homeland. But where non-Jews are second or third class citizens to some degrees. Maybe not under law, because there is a theoretical equality under law, restricted theoretical equality. You can see I've got to carefully choose my words. But for instance, initially, when Israel was established, Hebrew and Arabic were equal status languages. And the recent nation-state law, which was passed about 3 years ago, made Hebrew the official language and Arabic an optional other language. And actually on signs in Israel now, whereas it used to be in Hebrew, Arabic and English, it now typically is Hebrew, Russian and English. And Arabic is often left off. And racist because there are Jewish Israeli government ministers who come from parties which are self-acknowledged as racist parties that are about the superiority of Jews over others. One party, of which there are several members in the coalition, their party is called Jewish Power. Now, when we have parties in the UK called White Power, we know exactly what they're about. And that's where they come from. They're really about ensuring that Jews are victorious and the Palestinians know their place, and they either accept their sort of defeated status or they leave. And in some ways they would prefer if they left, and they don't care where. So it's that type of thing, which isn't everybody. But when you've got those voices sitting in the cabinet, then you know you've got problems. And that's why this government is worse than any government there has ever been before in Israel. And many Jews are frightened by the recent developments in their country.
Do you have a course for women in the Bible?
Yes, I think I mentioned that the one is starting right now. It wasn't listed, but I mentioned it.
Yeah.
So there are various other ones that do come around every other year or something like that, and Women in the Bible is one of those, and that's one that people really look forward to.
Anyone else? Don't be shy.
Yes.
30 years ago when we went to Jerusalem, we were able just to move freely around in the old city and up the Mount Olives. So you can still do that now?
You can still do that. 30 years ago, you'd have been able to go into the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound area much more freely than you can now, and you were probably able to go inside of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque building itself. Were you? Do you remember?
I think we were able to go into one of the...
Right. So now restrictions have been placed, and the vast majority of visitors are not able to go inside the building. But one of the advantages of St. George's College, because of our long history and our trusted relationships with the Muslim religious authorities, is that they will allow our groups inside both buildings, whereas 90% of visitors to the Holy Land are not able, if non-Muslims, not able to go inside. But walking around the streets of the old city, in many ways, you would not notice any difference to 30 years ago.
The worst experience was leaving the country and being grilled.
Yes.
And then grilled again by someone else
Yes.
to make sure that Australia was the same place.
The other big difference you would notice is the impact of the wall of separation. 400 miles of wall surrounding the West Bank, and that you can only go through in checkpoints. And that's a shock when you see that. You know, it's really a scar on the nation, and very painful.
What advice would you give to those preparing to go on a pilgrimage to St. George's?
The advice I always say, the most important thing is to come with a pilgrim's heart. And a pilgrim's heart is one which is prepared for the unexpected, prepared for an encounter with Christ, prepared to be surprised, and to come with an open heart for whatever it is that's going to come. So that's a sort of a spiritual and emotional preparation. Beyond that, the best practical advice is wear good shoes. And bring a big hat. It depends on the time of year, but you need good shoes all year round.
Any recommendations?
Doc Martens are perfect. Yeah, you know, because the streets of the old city are slippy, because you've got ancient stones that have been rubbed sort of slippy through millions of people walking on them. When there's a bit of rain, which there can be through the winter, it's like ice. But also very uneven. So, you know, your pavements around here are absolutely beautiful. There's not a bump in any of them. You know, it's all like this. This feels very strange to me, because the paving stones in the old city, you know, they're like this, they're like that, they're like this. And I always used to say, when people came to visit us in London and they would come and stay with us and go visiting the city, I'd say, don't look down, look up. Most of the interesting things in London take place above the level of the shop fronts. Look at the buildings up there. I say the opposite in Jerusalem. Don't look up, look down. Because if you're not looking down, you're going to fall over. And nothing looks great when you're lying on the floor looking up. I know, because it's happened to me, because when I go running around Jerusalem, there's so much jeopardy, and I'll fall over and cut my hands and knees.
What sort of food can we expect when we come over?
Fantastic food. Fresh food, locally grown, in season, freshly made, lots of it, mostly very healthy. It's not too spicy. It's interesting and different, but nothing I don't think that's very strange and that people are going to sort of balk at the idea of. It's wonderfully tasty. Occasionally I've had on the evaluation form somebody saying, please give us more Western food. I just put a line through that and go, no. People don't come to have burgers and chips and, fish and chip. Well, they may get fish and chips, but, you have the local food. It's not like going to a 5-star hotel. You've got an international food bar. You're getting local food, and it's wonderful.
Although, if I may add, Richard, if you wish to know how a Christian runs with a Muslim across Jerusalem to kosher McDonald's, you can ask me afterwards.
He's got a very good story about that.
Maybe before last question, if I may ask, because sometimes people here, good people of Holy Trinity and of Auckland, will ask me questions I cannot give always answers. You will be a much better person to give that, so you should ask him better than me. And that is, obviously, it's a very complicated situation, and let me move us from the, pilgrimage, just necessary walking and food. It's a complicated situation between three religions, and yet you are offering us sharing perspectives. You get people from all around the world to engage into that dialogue between three big religions. So is there a hope? What is their hope? We have no solutions, but what is hope for Holy Land, for Palestinians and for Israelis, for Jews, Christians and Muslims?
Thank you for the question. It is really important that we cling on to hope. And we, of all people, we Christians, are a people of hope. And if we give up and we give in to despair, I think that's a sort of denial of our faith, because we believe that God is actively involved in our world, and that God's love, care and compassion is a just love, care and compassion, and that God hears the cry of the poor and the oppressed. And if we say there's no hope, then we're saying God has given up on the Palestinians. And despite all the terrible things that I experience and see and read about and hear, I do not hear Palestinians giving up hope. There are bad days and very sad days, but I don't hear them saying, to be honest, I'm not paying any more attention to it. There's no point. And so, if that's their determination, then I think we have to cling on and try to make it real. And my hope comes from the small acts that make a difference, that maybe don't, as you say, they don't offer the solution, because that's too far away at the moment. It's over the horizon. But what I tend to say